Hello, and welcome to another episode of South Pole, the podcast that explores everything Antarctica. I am your host, Clark Marchese, and today we are talking about food webs, squids, climate change, biodiversity, penguins, marine protected areas, and cumulative environmental impacts. All right, in today's episode of South Pole, we are going to learn all about the Antarctic food web, and also we're going to learn what understanding how the food web is operating can tell us about ecosystems' overall health and resistance to climate change. To teach us about this, we have our guest, Dr. Xavier, who is a marine ecologist. Dr. Xavier's work focuses on predator-prey interactions in the Southern Ocean, particularly on foraging and feeding behavior of top predators, on how climate change affects key species, and he's published a couple books to help scientists identify squid beaks inside of fish stomachs, which we'll talk about today. And he's also done a lot of work with penguins. So this person has a very cool job, and we're going to hear about his experiences from the field and how his research helps inform policies aimed at protecting these fragile ecosystems. Now, before we jump into it, if you thought any of what I just said sounds interesting and important and that more people should know about it, one way you can help science communication like this reach more people is by giving us a one-tap 5-star rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps science communication like this reach more people, and it also helps the entire Pine Forest Media Network to grow. So thank you to all of you who feel called to help us out there. And without further ado, let's hear from Dr. Xavier. All right, hello, welcome to the show. The first question I have is if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your research.
Hi, I'm Xavier. I'm associate professor at the University of Coimbra, which is in Portugal, in Europe, and I'm an honorary fellow of the British Antarctic Survey in the UK. And what I've been amazed about all my life is understanding how the Southern Ocean is coping with change, with the different threats. It can be like climate change, pollution, fisheries. How can we make fisheries sustainable? He's looking at the Southern Ocean in a very passionate way, but also very scientific. So what I do in my team is trying to really understand how Antarctica, particularly the Southern Ocean that surrounds it, cold waters, how these different threats are impacting the animals that live there. So I've been working in the last 25 years, since 1997, I've been working with animals like penguins, seals, albatrosses, but also fish, squid, Antarctic krill. So I had the great opportunity to go on a wide range of opportunities to go to the Southern Ocean and understand these animals. So it's really exciting. So this is what my team does here.
Okay, that is really exciting work, and it's really cool that you get to interact with and study so many different kinds of animals, because I think a lot of scientists really specialize on one. I think I know the answer to this next question because I've seen a photo of you on the internet next to a giant penguin. But have you ever been to Antarctica? And maybe you could tell us a bit about some of the specific projects that took you down there?
So I've been in the Antarctic more than 10 times. So mostly south of South America, so Antarctic Peninsula and the Scotia Sea region. Being in the Antarctic so many times and having this privilege of working with penguins. So I have numerous photos of people. Why you have a penguin in your hands? Well, we work with them, so people took a photo. So it's not like saying, oh, you are with a penguin, look at me. And well, we work on conservation and we actually want to protect them. But there's people with photos, and I have numerous photos of me with a penguin. And they always think, are you damaging the penguin? No, we work with the penguin. Usually we're just measuring them and we are actually working to protect them. But one of the key things I think is really important to grasp, particularly if some of the audience wants to be scientists in the future, is that now science is very international and multidisciplinary. So we'll bring all these different disciplines. And one of the things that is really important that we want to do is do the best science we can and then communicate it the best way you can as well. So do a lot of education outreach, interact a lot with educational organizations, with schools, because you become almost an ambassador of Antarctica. So when you've been there, you're touched by such amazing experiences, and you know that your science can contribute to protect the animals that live there, this is extremely important. And this engaging, just giving your personal experience, how to live in the Antarctic, how to work in the Antarctic, how we cope with the extreme environments, it's very inspiring and for the younger generations. I always describe Antarctica as a planet within a planet. So imagine you walking down the street and penguins jump out of the water and they actually come and greet you because they never seen a human before. So it happened to me being on the beach, just sitting down, we're just walking to a penguin colony, and then suddenly there's like, I don't know, dozens of them just jumping out of the water, and then you lie down, and then they come next to you just to be your friends. So it's just like they have no sense of being afraid, and I think it's that feeling that you are in a planet that actually it's like being in a zoo, but the animals come to see you. You are the weird one. And this is how it is, Antarctica. It's such a special place.
Well, speaking of all these animals, one of the main themes of the discussion today is going to be biodiversity. So for listeners, biodiversity is all of the species in a given place. On a large scale, it refers to the variety of all life on Earth, including species of plants, animals, microorganisms, the ecosystem they form, and even the genetic diversity within the species. Now, a high level of biodiversity, meaning lots of different species in a given area, is extremely important for many actors, right? Including humans and humanity, even economies, but also perhaps most obviously ecosystems. Having this high level of biodiversity supports these ecosystems by making them more resilient to disturbances like climate change or disease outbreaks, for example. But today we're talking in the context of Antarctica. So I'm going to ask if you can tell us what gaining an understanding about biodiversity in the Southern Ocean can tell us about the health of the Antarctic ecosystem.
When I look at biodiversity, I'll just break the words into two. Diversity is being diverse, so different forms of things. And bio is life, so the different types of life, in this case, in the Southern Ocean. And that's it. Can go from a bacteria, could be any organism, from bacteria to a whale. So that's the relevance. The thing is, why it's relevant for the Antarctic is that in the Antarctic, the animals are coping or evolved, a lot of them, to the cold waters. So they evolved to those temperatures of the water being at 0 degrees Celsius or around -1 Celsius to 2 or 3 degrees. So they're really, really very used to the cold. So understanding biodiversity, how that they occupy the different habitats, it's really crucial.
Okay. So there's a link between understanding the region's biodiversity and the ecosystem's resilience to climate change. And I believe you worked on a research project in the South Sandwich Islands that was asking those very kinds of questions. For anyone listening, the South Sandwich Islands are a group of islands in the Southern Ocean, somewhat between South America and the Antarctic Peninsula, and quite a lot of Antarctic research takes place there. But in any case, can you tell us what this project was trying to understand?
It's a very good point, because when we talk about biodiversity and climate change, one of the key issues for us, being a marine biologist, is trying to understand how the animals cope with change. So if you increase temperature, we'll be able to deal with it. That's the major question that we want to do. And what we've been finding is that different species have different tools to cope with climate change. So for example, a penguin, if the temperatures get too warm, if they can, they will just move south. They just try to get their food, what they like, more south if they can. But imagine if they already live south and they have nowhere to go. So probably there'll be a major problem. I give an example. Emperor penguins is one of the species that we know that at the moment, climate change might have a major impact on them in the next 100 years. You know that with Antarctica, with air temperatures increasing, it is going to affect them. And we know the models, so for us to build models to understand what is likely to happen in the future, we need the data now. And this is what we're doing at the moment, is trying to collect all the scientific information about the population, the diets, where they go, where these emperor penguins go, so that we'll really understand that if these temperatures change, what is likely to happen to them in the future. The second question is, how is it important to study biodiversity in a remote area like South Sandwich Islands, which is our tiny islands just right at the edge of the Southern Ocean? And they are crucial because they are that interface between really cold waters of the Antarctic, very close to the continent, to getting warm waters further north. So they are in the interface of those animals that cope really well with colds, with the animals that are able to adapt to more warmer waters. And as things are getting warmer, so this is slowly going down. And what we want to do, and this was the PhD studies of one of my students, Xavier, he just finished his PhD thesis, was trying to understand which organisms live where in this interface, in these islands. So in this archipelago, a few islands are further north in warmer waters and the other ones in the colder waters. And in the same region, it's very interesting to understand deep sea ecosystems because the temperatures are really cold in the deep sea, and they have fisheries occurring in the region. So we have fisheries, we have the impact of climate change in the region, and understanding animals that cope with the deep sea ecosystems. So that makes that area very interesting to study. And we found that these animals or these ecosystems are relatively different, and we have to be very careful now how you manage it. But we still have a lot of research to do, really.
So it seems one of the ways we can get a grasp on a region's biodiversity is through looking at what animals eat or their diet. But this is a new method for me. So maybe you can help us understand how that works, how, I guess, using predators as, I guess, a biological sampler would be the scientific term. Can you tell us how that gives us an indication of biodiversity?
Yeah, because so in that South Sandwich Islands, there's fisheries around. And the fisheries, they use long-line hooks to catch the fish, usually in the deep sea. And these animals, the toothfish, there's two species there that are commercialized, and they can reach almost 2 meters, 200 kilos. So that's huge. They're big fish. So, for example, I'll give you an example. Rather than trying to use a scientific net, usually scientific nets are relatively small, they're a bit slow, they're very good at sampling certain parts of organisms. But if I want to catch, for example, squid are much faster to escape nets. So what do? Let's use fisheries and use these toothfish to catch the squid for us. So when you catch, so Jose, for example, you went on the fishing vessels where they were catching the fish to sell in the market. We would keep the stomachs and collect tiny, small muscle samples to characterize what they were eating. And particularly looking at their stomachs, we will find the squid that we want to study, because squid is one of the organisms that most likely are able to cope with climate change. Why? Because they are fast growing. Most of the squid is 1 to 2 years. So they hatch from the eggs, they grow, they eat, grow, and they reproduce once and they die. So they are really good for a squid that has 1 to 2 years, they really give you a snapshot how they're coping with change. And so the best way to do it is using their natural predators. So if there are fisheries that are catching the fish, why not using the fish to understand deep sea ecosystems, what they eat, and that they're interlinked?
That's so interesting. So you look inside the stomach and you try and find out what kind of squid they ate, for example.
And we've been doing that for quite a while, and we published a couple of books. One of the key things that we have to understand in science is there's still a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. And we just published a couple of books in the last, 10 years. One was just identifying crustaceans. I'll just get the book here. So we wrote 2 books. This is the most recent one. So this is how geek I am, So we have a book that will help scientists to identify crustaceans, like from crabs to krill, different type of animals or crustaceans. And you think, well, why crustaceans are important? Well, they are important. Not only are they numerous, but everybody loves it. Penguin love it, a seal love it, whales love it, everybody eats them. But the thing is, if you're trying to find them and identify them, it's a nightmare, because until this time, couple of years ago, everything was split up in different research papers, in different books, and so on. So we just brought all together colleagues from around the world and spent 8 years working on this book. And the other one, and this was on squid beaks. It's a cephalopod guide. So cephalopods are squid, octopods, and cuttlefish. Is that group of cephalopods. But in the Southern Ocean, it's mostly squid and octopods. And the thing is, you can identify them through their beaks, so their mandibles. And this is really important because if you want to understand the diet of a penguin, you don't have the all nice squid all together. You have their beaks. And we created a guide reviewed on how can identify through their beaks the species, how size, how big they are, and how much they weigh. And if you do chemical analysis on them, we can understand where they lived, what is their age, huge amount of information. So this is just an example, just have an idea on the research that we do. Is really fundamental because without these, the hard to understand, for example, food web dynamics, how the penguins cope with climate change is essential.
Okay, help me understand that link. What does putting together this food web tell us about resilience to climate change?
One of the conclusions that Xavier concluded was that with climate change, there's a tendency of the food webs to be more elongated. So it means that you have more trophic levels. So it means that diversify, and by diversifying, so it means that there's, instead of a whale eating krill, that's an example, we would have big fish eating little fish, and then another big fish eating the bigger fish and only reaching the whale. So there's more links with it, but make it more fragile with climate change. So it's more diverse. And I think that can have, could be not very positive in the future if climate change changes temperatures, change the animals that live there, and the food webs become more diverse and more fragile. And this is one of the conclusions that Xavier found, that we have to be monitoring that region much more, and we need to do more science to really understand in the coming years how long they are and what are likely to change the food web structure.
I just want to make sure I understand this correct. Are you saying that this conclusion is that the trophic levels are increasing in numbers in recent years due to climate change?
Not necessarily increasing, they are just diversifying. So it means that you could be increasing of trophic levels. Yes, it could be like have another fish going higher and higher. That could happen. Or simply you could have more next to each other. So we had squid and fish just next to each other and then going all feed to another high predator. It's just a question of if you have various trophic levels more diversified, the food web itself can be more weakened. That was his rationale.
Okay, so it's more of a horizontal growth, like they're casting a wider net?
It's both horizontal and vertical, not just one.
Okay, so I'm curious then, because as I'm hearing this now, you might think that an increase in diversity of possible options for food, more things to choose from, might be a good thing. So why does it in fact make them more vulnerable?
For example, Antarctic krill is a shrimp-like crustacean, and everybody eats it. So it's very abundant at the base of the food web, and whales and penguins and everybody eats it, and everybody's happy, for example. In bad years, there's no Antarctic krill, and there are other zooplankton, so other small crustaceans. And who usually eat these small crustaceans are, for example, myctophid fish. So we have another level. And then the squid would eat the myctophids. And the squid and the myctophids would probably feed the other ones that were the fish that were above. Instead of going straight, it'll be more, the energy transfer will be quicker and faster. Diversing can not necessarily a positive thing. So it's just, in a nutshell, it's just understanding the structure of the food webs is not necessarily biodiversity, because all the biodiversity, the different phytoforms on the food webs are always there. It's how the energy is transferred in a year that is good, that everybody's happy. And when it's happy, generally, the transference of energy is very quick. When it's more fragile, it's more fragmented. So it means that the energy is more diluted and the energy is higher. It doesn't flow as much. That's it. It becomes more fragile because if you eliminate one of the nodules, one of them, then it can become more fragile. But again, what I'm telling you, Clark, is we just found out. So this is really new. So we really understand, is that a bad thing or a good thing? But the conclusion at the moment is that by becoming longer, more nodules within the food webs, it might become more negative under a climate change scenario in the future. The motivation of doing research in South Sandwich Islands is because we don't know, and because it's on that interface between cold waters from the Antarctic and warmer waters, and we want to understand how food webs will deal with this change of warming of these threats. That's the main reason.
Okay, so it's not quite possible to attribute the less efficient nature of the trophic levels to climate change just yet, or are we able to do that?
We estimate that it's likely that climate change will affect the food web structure. We need more data to make sure that it is. So with the data that we have, it gives us that under the conditions that we have, that climate change will make the food webs longer and more weakened. But we need more data. That's for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe it's an indicator of scarcity if animals are having to diversify what they eat and where they're getting their energy from. Other than, say, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, is there anything that humans can do to address this issue? Marine protected areas, perhaps?
It's a good point. It depends what we want. I think from my perspective, what we want is look at the oceans in a sustainable way. If fisheries can operate, I think they should. If we do it in a sustainable way, I think that's fine. If we have scientific evidence that certain areas should be protected and should have a marine protected area, that's fine too. I think I'm quite happy with it. One of the key points of understanding what marine protected areas actually does is that they would allow to have a given area that, for example, small fish, as an example, small fish can be there and be protected, and will allow them to grow. And after they grow, they will be able to reproduce. And by releasing lots of eggs, more fish will be there. And we've done some research, very interesting research, by tracking top predators, albatrosses, penguins, and seals across the Southern Ocean. And we identified within Antarctica certain areas that we considered as hotspots of biodiversity. Why? Because the penguins and the seals and the albatrosses, they go where the food is. So we were able to define around Antarctica where are these hotspots. And what we found is that where higher diversity is only 1/3 is at the moment protected, in understanding that Antarctica itself is almost a natural reserve. So it means that not only we should be conscious where the science is, where these animals go, which areas should be more likely to be protected, but most importantly, what should we do in the future? Because if these areas are, let's say, here, and in the future with climate change, they will go slightly different, and you're trying to put a marine protected area and stay there forever, after 50 years, you're not protecting anything. So what it means is marine protected areas should be adjustable. And how they should be implemented in Southern Ocean? Well, the Antarctic Treaty has been revolutionary because they introduced the first marine protected area in international waters, which was just south of South Orkneys. And the second one was on the other side, south of Australia at the Ross Sea. And this is like 50 times the size of Portugal. So they're talking about major decisions politically to protect certain areas of Antarctica. But it's just the way it is. But by having these marine protected areas, probably most likely there will be more enthusiasm to create more in other parts of Antarctica, because you'll be able to manage better fisheries or dealing with pollution or with tourism, for example. But always seeing that marine protected areas, from my perspective, should be in a way that looking at us as humans, relating to the environment in a sustainable way. How can we be there, minimizing the impact? If we have fisheries, fine. If they're well managed, there's no problem. But there will be enough food for the animals that live there, for the penguins, for the seals, for the albatrosses, for everyone. And I think we can do that. But Antarctica has been pioneering in marine protected areas in international waters. And I think that it's most likely there will be more in the future. So we are in the right track, and politically, I think we're doing well.
Okay, and then I guess when deciding where a marine protected area should be, I imagine there's a lot that goes into that. I came across another research project that you did that was a bioregionalization of the Southern Ocean. I had never heard that word before, so can you tell us what is a bioregionalization?
That was started by Andrew Constable and their group more than 10 years ago. And the reason is that when we look at the Southern Ocean, I would say 50 years ago, we look at the Southern Ocean all the same. The food web would be the same, and the characteristics all across Antarctica would be very similar within the Southern Ocean. And as we started collecting more information at different regions of the Antarctic, we realized that actually they were different. Temperatures could be slightly different. The habitats are different. The light intensity is different. The sea ice extent, the ice that forms around the surface of the Antarctic can be different. And by being different, scientists look at it and say, well, if they are slightly different, they could be different regions within the Southern Ocean. So if they have these certain characteristics, let's call it Zone 1. And other parts that have similar characteristics of the Southern Ocean, Zone 2. And so bioregularization looks at life in different parts of the Southern Ocean that have similar conditions. And that study so really identified various parts of the Southern Ocean that have similar conditions. And why, then you ask, Clark, why is that important? Well, because if you want to protect it and you know the characteristics that are similar in that given region, probably you could adapt your level of protection or whatever you want to do in that region. You know that if you're going to take a measure to protect it, it could apply to all that given region. Because the problem that we had before is that if you assume that you wanted to protect a certain given region, and then you say, let's implement something to protect it here. And then you say, somebody on the other side of Antarctica and say, this doesn't apply to us. The temperatures are totally different. The sea ice is totally different and didn't make any sense. So the main point of bioregionalization is looking at the Southern Ocean in the way that from a biodiversity perspective, you could see similar characteristics in the different regions. So that when we trying to protect it or trying to do or manage it in a given in a certain perspective, we can do it in a more useful way. That's the main reason.
Okay, and we've discussed on the show how both climate change and fisheries can, potentially pose threats if, emissions don't reduce or fisheries aren't well managed. But I'm wondering, are there any other threats to biodiversity that we can identify through looking at food webs?
There's a wide range of threats. I think if you look at you could have like plastic pollution, and we have numerous studies now looking at pollution by plastic, microplastics, nanoplastics. Actually, one of the studies of our group was the first to identify microplastics in the diet of penguins in the Antarctic. We thought that was like, it's not possible. There have been microplastic pollution have been identified in the sediments and in the water, but never in penguins. And then we thought, well, probably won't find anything. And we found them. And now there's numerous studies on a wide range of penguins and fish and so on that broke like a new door of science to understand that actually plastic pollution could be also a big issue like it is elsewhere in the other oceans, but also in the Antarctic. And why is plastic pollution a problem? Is like you, Clark, if you decide to eat plastic, sooner or later, I think your digestion will be highly affected. And so it is logical that eating plastic is not good for you. So what the point is, if plastic is inert, so if you just swallow it and then you get rid of it again, then you think, oh, it's not a problem. But what we have some evidence that possibly, including mercury or other metals, could attach to plastic. So when you ingest plastic, it's not the plastic itself that could make you a problem, but also they aggregate other problems, other threats without realizing. And one of the stages we're in, and it's not just the Southern Ocean, is worldwide, is to tackle plastic pollution. One is, of course, cut on plastic. But secondly, and most importantly, is trying to understand the effects, the potential impacts of plastic could have on the animals that live in the ocean that we still don't know. And I just mentioned mercury being attached, but could be persistent organic pollutants, could be that we call it POPs, could be a wide range of other threats that I haven't thought about it. And this is one of the things that we're looking at. Mercury is very interesting scientifically because we don't have major sources of mercury in the Southern Ocean. So actually mercury comes from the air, from other areas of the planet that they use mercury and come from the air or from the water. So they don't come from Antarctica itself generally. And so what is unique about the Southern Ocean, the problem of mercury, is that the mercury levels, if you look at mercury levels in fish or squid, you think they're not very high. There's not many sources of pollution. They come from elsewhere, but it's not as high as other oceans. But there's a problem, which is the animals, the top predators, like penguins or seals or albatrosses, they can reach very long ages. So what it means is an albatross can reach 50, 60 years old. And you think if you eat, even if you have small amounts of mercury on squid, for example, if you spend 50 years eating squid with some levels of mercury, that can bioaccumulate. So albatrosses, by being so old, they can reach levels they are some of the animals, marine animals, definitely within birds that have the highest levels of mercury. Of course, if you have high levels of mercury, it means it's not very good for your system, of course. And we're looking into that. We already evidence that mercury levels could affect the life of the animals. So that is a problem. Although the source of mercury can go from elsewhere, by the animals that live in the Antarctic can reach longevity, they can affect their high levels of mercury that we find. So what we want to do, and that's a good sense of hope, is there some evidence that the quantity of mercury is actually declining due to international some measures. So actually in the Southern Ocean, we only have 10 years of data, so it's not still a lot, but it gives that the amount of the trends that we have on squid is actually they're declining a little bit. So there's a good news too. But the long term, for the ones that eat them, they still have high levels of mercury. So there's a sense that, it's not the worst of both worlds, but there's some sense of hope in terms of mercury. They could be declining a bit. But one note of caution is that different animals bioaccumulate mercury in different ways. So albatrosses will try to remove them with feathers, for example, but fish, possibly, they'll probably accumulate in their liver or other tissues. So different strategies will apply to the different animals. So there's not a full picture still on how mercury could affect the Southern Ocean, but it's definitely a problem.
I didn't know that about which parts of the animal's body the pollutant actually gets accumulated. That's definitely something that would perhaps make a huge difference. And also maybe one note on this as well is that despite these being separate issues, they might even perhaps be compounding issues, because if you're already facing the threat of climate change, for example, and then you have mercury on top of that, these populations can be under a lot of different vulnerabilities at one time that kind of all pile up on top of each other.
Yeah, Clark, we have a word for it. Now it's scientifically we are addressing this. We call it cumulative impacts. So climate change, let's say pollution, plastic pollution, it adds on trace metal pollution. So all these stressors plus environmental change, of course, adds up. And it's just, if you see, in the last 10, 15 years, we've been breaking down scientifically, look, what is the impact of mercury? What is the impact of persistent organic pollutants? All separate. And now we're saying, my God, Clark is right. We need to look at the cumulative impacts all together. But of course, scientifically, that has become more complex as well, because there's more variables. It depends on the organism. It depends what they eat, what is their life cycle, and so on. But we're looking into that now.
I suppose it would be challenging too, right? Because a lot of research questions are extremely specific, and research is so expensive and labor intensive and takes a lot of time. But I'm glad we're looking at ways to sort of ask these questions about cumulative impacts. That's the word, yeah?
Yeah, cumulative impacts. Yeah. Of the different threats. And the future now, and this is another example, is to put more scientists into policymaking. So to accelerate the process of having the scientific data, collecting the samples, go to the Antarctic, come back, analyze, publish the research paper. Just don't deliver it to a policymaker. Actually, you become an active role and you become a policymaker. And I'm the head of delegation of Portugal at the Antarctic Treaty meetings. So as a scientist, I have a huge privilege to not only talk with other policymakers, but also bridging the different levels of language that we use, because we have a lot of colleagues working on law and on an environment or on politics. And we're bringing everybody on the same table and sit down and trying to make sure we communicate the best way we can in a language that everybody tries to understand, so that we create much faster and quicker laws that will accelerate the protection of Antarctica, but also understanding these threats, these cumulative impacts, and do the best science, but mostly helping in identifying actions that we can do. Not only Antarctica, but even in our own countries.
Okay, I definitely support this trend. I think we definitely need more scientists as policymakers.
Yeah, for sure. And the future is that, I think.
Well, as we start to round out this conversation, and I'm sure we could talk about this for a long time, but is there anything that would be remiss not to mention in a discussion about food webs and biodiversity in this Antarctic region?
So in the Antarctic, I think is a good model that could be applied elsewhere in the planet. And the threats that are facing Antarctica, we didn't mention sea level rise, but the impact of sea level rise to the rest of the planet from Antarctica, if the ice melts, will be huge. But this is an example of recognizing the importance of Antarctica. That would be one thing to the rest of the planet. The second point I think we haven't mentioned, I think would be very important, is recognizing the value of early career scientists. There's APEX, the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists. They were created must have been 20 years ago, in 2006, 2007, almost 20 years. And they were revolutionary. Why? Because we're giving the voice to the next generation of early career of scientists. And now they are well established. And for me, being there, understanding how our voices were built on was crucial. Why? Because when you are an early career scientist, you are more open-minded to use new methods, more critical thinking, you have more time, you're enthusiast, everything is going for you, and we need those. So we need to continue nurturing early career scientists to be engaging in Antarctic science. That's one big message, and many thanks to everyone that's contributing. The second aspect is education. Polar Educators International were created in 2012, and again, they are using the science to communicate to the general public. They have been crucial. PEI, they are amazing educators, group of educators, to bring the message to the general public the best way we can. Activities that work to make sure the best science is available to them. I think it's great. And also noting that the next International Polar Year will be in 2032-33. And we're already thinking about it. We are in 2024, and it's still 9 years to go or 8 years to go. And we're already thinking about it. How can we get the momentum to engage the politicians, the national programs, the early career scientists, the educators, all communities, to understand that the importance of the polar regions and the science that we do there can impact the rest of the planet. Looking at biodiversity and food webs, yes, for sure. And we can learn a lot. What is happening in Antarctica could affect the rest of the world. And I think that was one of the big messages that I have today.
I really like that answer. No one has said that so far. Well, the last question is, where can people find you and follow your work?
I'm very easy to find. So I have a blog called Polar Science, or on Facebook, if you write my name, it's very easy to find. At the University of Coimbra, of course, or British Antarctic Survey. Yeah, I'm very easy to find if you have any questions, or if you're from a school and you like to do some Zooms or stuff like that. We've been working a lot with schools from the last 20 years. And so we are very used to go and lecturing either online or in person. And we've been around the world on this. But of course, with online, we also want to use to reduce our ecological footprint. So actually, we quite promote doing a lot of web work. But yeah, if you're curious, you want to learn more, just contact me. I'll be very happy to help. Yeah, and the goal of scientists is this too, you know. And one thing that I want everyone to remember: never feel that you're bothering a scientist. If a scientist is passionate what they do, they will read your email and say, "Yeah, let's give an answer." And they are enthusiastic and they're very keen. And I think in terms of polar science, and particularly in the Antarctic and the Southern Ocean, 99.9% of everyone is really passionate and really happy to answer you. So don't stop. Never assume that, oh, I'm bothering him. No, everybody's really nice. We're here for you.
I can definitely vouch for that being true. As someone who reaches out to a lot of scientists who study a lot of different things, I would say they're all very nice and friendly and interested and happy to speak to you. So yeah, and maybe I'll even also add that I have found a level of added enthusiasm from people in the Antarctic space, which is really refreshing and fun for me. Well, at this point, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Thank you so much for coming on the show and teaching us about food webs in Antarctica, and also for your really important research in this space.
Thank you, Clark. It was a real pleasure, and be in touch.
You've been listening to South Pole. You can find more information about this week's guest and links to their work in the episode description. Cover art for the show was done by Laurel Wong, and the music you're listening to was done by Neela Ruiz. I am your host, Clark Marchese, and this episode was produced and engineered by me. If you found it interesting, send it to someone you know. South Pole is part of a larger network of sciencey podcasts called Pine Forest Media. We've got one on plastic, one on drinking water, and a couple new ones coming out soon. You can find more information about us in the episode description as well, or on our website at pineforestpods.com. We are also on Instagram and TikTok at Pine Forest Media, and if you love the show and you want to support science communication like this, a 5-star rating across platforms and a review on Apple Podcasts is one of the best things you can do to help us reach more people and for the entire network to grow. All right, thank you to all of you who have made it this far, and we'll chat soon.